The gold-veined marble of the Sovereign Club caught the afternoon light and threw it back in patterns that made my eyes ache. I couldn't tell if it was the glare or the fear making my vision swim. My fingers worked the stems of the white lilies, threading them through the foam base, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The delicate petals bruised under my touch, brown spreading at the edges like the marks Sebastian used to leave on my skin. I focused on arranging each flower precisely, anything to keep from looking at the entrance, anything to quiet the voice in my head that screamed I shouldn't have taken this contract. I'd been servicing the Sovereign Club's events for 2 months now, always through the loading dock, always after hours when the elite members were gone. Today, the events coordinator texted me at the last minute. VIP arrival in an hour, the main foyer needs the centerpiece now, use the front entrance, the back is locked for security protocols. Of course, because my carefully constructed invisibility wasn't fragile enough without standing in the middle of the most visible room in the city's most exclusive club. The foyer stretched around me like a gilded trap, all soaring ceilings and crystal sconces that multiplied the light until there was nowhere to hide. The air was thick with old money and the cloying sweetness of the tuberose someone had ordered for the side tables. My worn canvas sneakers made no sound on the floor, but I felt exposed anyway. A smudge of dirt on a perfect surface. I kept my head down counting stems. 12 more lilies. Then I could pack up, collect my check from the office, and vanish back to my studio apartment across the river. 12 flowers. I could manage that. The front doors opened. I knew the sound of those hinges, heavy and expensive, the kind that whispered wealth. But it was the footsteps that stopped my heart. Confidence. Deliberate. The sharp crack of Italian leather on marble that I'd learned to recognize in the dark, in my sleep, in my nightmares. Sebastian. My hands froze, a lily stem bent between my fingers, already broken. I didn't look up. Maybe if I stayed perfectly still, he'd walk past. Maybe the universe would grant me this one mercy and make me invisible just this once. Anna. The voice sliced through the lobby's gentle murmur like a blade through silk. That familiar baritone with its edge of ownership, that particular way he shaped my name like a collar tightening around my throat. My vision tunneled, the gold walls closing in, the flowers in front of me blurring into white noise. I didn't turn around. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs had turned to lead. Maybe if I kept working, he'd think he was mistaken. Maybe after 8 months and a legal name change he wouldn't be sure. Anna, I know that's you. Closer now. Close enough that I could smell his cologne cutting through the tuberose. Did you really think you could hide from me in my own city? The floral shears slipped from my hand and clattered against the marble table, the sound impossibly loud. 23 steps to the elevators. I'd counted them when I arrived, the same way I counted exits everywhere now, the same way I'd been counting escapes for 3 years. I ran. My feet found traction on the polished floor, the flower arrangement scattering behind me as my hip caught the table's edge. I heard Sebastian's sharp intake of breath, then his voice rising, commanding, the one he used when I displeased him, when the punishment was coming. Anna. 23 steps became a sprint, became my whole world narrowing to the brass elevator doors ahead. My chest burned. My ankle rolled on the slick marble, but I kept moving, kept reaching, because stopping meant his hands on me again, meant going back to being the woman who flinched at footsteps, who wore scarves in summer to hide the fingerprints. The elevator call button blazed under my palm. Behind me, Sebastian's footsteps quickened, his breathing growing louder. The doors began to part, agonizingly slow, a sliver of safety widening inch by inch. I didn't wait. I shoved my body through the gap, my shoulder scraping against the closing mechanism, and stumbled inside, and crashed into a wall of expensive wool and cold, lethal stillness. I looked up. The man standing in the elevator wasn't empty space or safety or salvation. He was tall, dark-suited, with eyes the color of winter steel and a face carved from the same granite as the men in the oil paintings that lined the club's halls. Power radiated from him like heat, the kind that didn't ask for permission or offer apologies. His hand, I noticed distantly, was tattooed. Dark ink disappeared beneath the crisp white cuff of his shirt, curling around his wrist like smoke. Behind me, Sebastian's hand shot through the closing gap, fingers grasping, reaching for my arm. The man in the elevator looked at me, then at Sebastian's straining hand. Then, with a movement so deliberate it stopped my breath, he pressed 2 buttons on the panel. Lock. Emergency stop. The elevator gave a mechanical shudder. The doors sealed shut with a soft, final hiss, cutting Sebastian's reaching fingers off mid-grab. I heard him slam against the exterior, and heard his muffled roar of fury. And then there was only silence and me and Lewis Gallagher, the king of the North End, watching me with the patient interest of a predator who just found something unexpected in his territory. Well, he said, his voice a dark velvet rasp that made my survival instincts scream louder than they had for Sebastian. This is interesting. The elevator hung suspended between floors, a cage with no exit, and I realized with perfect, terrible clarity that I'd traded one monster for something infinitely more dangerous. My legs gave out. One moment I was standing, pressed against the brass panel, staring at this man who just locked us in together. The next, my knees buckled and I was sliding down the wall, my palms squeaking against the polished metal as I tried to catch myself. I landed hard on the carpeted floor, my breath coming in sharp, broken gasps that sounded too loud in the confined space. Sebastian was still pounding on the doors. The sound reverberated through the elevator car like a heartbeat, rhythmic and relentless. Bang, bang, bang. Each impact sent a jolt through my nervous system, triggering muscle memory I'd spent 8 months trying to forget. My hands flew up instinctively, covering my head, protecting the places he used to aim for. Anna, open this fucking door. His voice was muffled but clear enough, rising to that pitch that meant he was past reason, past caring who heard him. You think you can run? You think anyone in this city will protect you from me? I couldn't breathe. The elevator walls were closing in, the gold-toned lighting suddenly too bright, the air too thin. My vision swam with black spots, my chest constricting like Sebastian's hands were already around my ribs, squeezing. A shadow fell over me. I looked up through the blur of panic and tears I hadn't realized were falling. The man stood above me, utterly still, his expression unreadable. He hadn't moved since pressing those buttons, hadn't flinched at Sebastian's rage, hadn't even looked toward the doors. He was looking at me. My gaze traveled down to his hand, still resting on the elevator panel. The tattoos I'd glimpsed before were fully visible now, dark ink crawling up from his wrist in intricate patterns, Celtic knots that wrapped around his knuckles, a crown on his thumb, and something else, words in a language I didn't recognize curling along the inside of his palm. His fingers were long, elegant even, but there was something about the way they curved over the buttons that spoke of violence held in check, of power that didn't need to announce itself. The lock button glowed red beneath his index finger. Emergency stop blazed orange under his middle finger. He kept them depressed with barely any pressure, as casual as if he were holding a wine glass. Please, I whispered, my voice cracking. I didn't even know what I was asking for. Please let me go. Please don't hurt me. Please make Sebastian disappear. Please don't be worse than what I just escaped. The man tilted his head slightly, studying me with those winter steel eyes. Outside, Sebastian had stopped pounding. The silence was somehow worse, pregnant with whatever he was planning next. Lewis Gallagher. His voice was low, controlled, with the faint trace of an accent I couldn't place. Not an introduction. A statement of fact, delivered like a judge announcing a verdict. My stomach dropped. I knew that name. Everyone in this city knew that name, even if they only whispered it in the dark. The king of the North End. The man whose justice came swift and final, who owned half the politicians and all of the silence. I know who you are, I managed. His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. Then you know I don't make a habit of trapping terrified women in elevators. He paused, his gaze dropping to the bruise on my collarbone that my shirt couldn't quite hide. Unless there's a very good reason. The emergency stop button glowed brighter under his finger, and I realized with crystalline clarity that he wasn't holding those buttons down to keep Sebastian out. He was holding them down to keep me in. Lewis Gallagher didn't move to help me up. He simply stood there, one hand still on the control panel, the other sliding into the pocket of his tailored trousers. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled taut, and I became acutely aware of how small I was on this floor, how my breathing was still ragged while he remained perfectly even. Sebastian Ward. He said the name like he was testing the weight of it, turning it over in his mouth. City Council liaison. Drives a black Audi. Lives in the Ashford Towers penthouse. His eyes never left my face. Your husband. Ex-husband. I corrected automatically, then immediately regretted speaking. Drawing his attention felt like standing in a spotlight I desperately wanted to escape. Ex-husband, he repeated, and something in his tone made the word sound like a technicality that didn't particularly interest him. Yet he chases you through the Sovereign Club like a man who believes you still belong to him. It wasn't a question, but the expectation of an answer hung in the air anyway. I pressed my back harder against the elevator wall, wishing I could disappear into the metal. Outside, Sebastian had gone quiet, but I could feel him out there waiting, calculating his next move. How long have you been running? Louis asked. 8 months. And before that? How long did you stay? My jaw tightened. That's none of your business. His eyebrow lifted fractionally, the only indication he'd registered my defiance. You're in my elevator. You brought your mess into my club. That makes it my business. He crouched down then, a fluid movement that brought him to eye level with me. The scent of his cologne hit me. Something dark and expensive, cedar and smoke. I'm not a therapist, Anna. I'm not going to offer you tissues and tell you it's not your fault. I'm going to ask you questions, and you're going to answer them. Because I need to know what I'm dealing with. The casual use of my name sent ice down my spine. I hadn't told him who I was. You know my name. I know everything that happens in this building. He tilted his head, studying me with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining something under glass. I know you've been delivering flowers here for 2 months under the name Anna Payne. I know your real name is Anna Ward. I know your bank account has $347 in it. And I know you sleep with a kitchen knife under your pillow in that studio apartment on Mercer Street. My blood ran cold. How? I told you. I know everything. His voice remained utterly calm, conversational even, which somehow made it more terrifying. What I don't know yet is whether you're worth the trouble of what comes next. What comes next? The question came out as barely a whisper. Louis's gaze dropped to my hands, still trembling against the carpet. Your ex-husband is outside my elevator making demands. He's called building security. In approximately 90 seconds, they'll override this lock, and those doors will open. His eyes returned to mine, cold and assessing. So you have 90 seconds to convince me why I should care what happens to you when they do. He wasn't offering salvation. He was conducting an appraisal, determining if I was an asset or a liability. And the clock was ticking. I met his gaze and realized that begging wouldn't move him. Tears wouldn't move him. Louis Gallagher didn't operate on compassion. He operated on value. Because, I said, forcing my voice steady, if you let him take me, everyone in this club will see that you couldn't protect someone in your own elevator. And men like you don't let that kind of weakness show. For the first time, Louis Gallagher smiled. It was a terrible, beautiful thing. Interesting, he murmured. Very interesting indeed. Tell me what he did to you. The command came without preamble, without softness. Louis remained crouched in front of me, close enough that I could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, the precise line of his jaw. He wasn't asking out of sympathy. He was gathering intelligence, building a case file in that calculating mind. Does it matter? My voice came out bitter, exhausted. Men like Sebastian don't need reasons. They just need control. It matters, he said, because I need to know if he'll come back, if he'll escalate, if this ends tonight or if I'm inheriting a war. Inheriting. As if I was already his problem to solve, his asset to protect. The presumption should have terrified me more than it did. But somewhere in the past 5 minutes, my fear receptors had simply burned out. There was nothing left but the numb truth. It started small. I heard myself saying the words coming from somewhere distant, checking my phone, questioning where I'd been. Then it was what I wore, who I talked to, how I smiled at the barista. I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. He said he was protecting me, that the world was dangerous and he was the only one who loved me enough to keep me safe. Louis said nothing, but his stillness had changed quality, becoming more focused, more intent. The first time he hit me, he cried after, begged forgiveness, said it would never happen again. A hollow laugh escaped me. It happened again 3 days later. And then it wasn't about what I did anymore, it was about what he imagined I might do. What he convinced himself I was thinking. How long? Louis's voice had dropped lower, taking on an edge that raised the hair on my arms. 3 years. The admission felt like swallowing glass. I tried to leave twice. He found me both times. The second time, I stopped, my hand unconsciously moving to my jaw, to the thin white line that disappeared into my hairline. The second time he put me through our glass coffee table. Told the ER I'd slipped in the shower. Louis's hand shot out faster than I could track. His fingers caught my chin, tilting my face toward the light with a grip that was firm but somehow not painful. I froze, every muscle locking up, but he wasn't hurting me. He was examining me, his thumb brushing along my jawline until it found the scar I'd learned to hide with makeup in careful angles. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went very dark, very cold. It was the look of a man making calculations that ended in violence. He marked you. Not a question. A statement of unforgivable offense. He owned me, I whispered. Or he thought he did. That's why I ran. That's why I changed my name, my hair, everything. But he found me anyway. He always finds me. Louis's thumb traced the scar once more. And I felt the tremor that ran through his hand, the controlled fury vibrating just beneath his surface. When he spoke again, his voice was velvet wrapped around razor wire. Not anymore. The words landed like a verdict, and I watched something shift in his face, saw the exact moment his interest transformed into something far more dangerous. Possession. The kind that didn't ask permission, that simply claimed and held and defended. You're under my protection now, Anna. His hand dropped from my face, but his gaze pinned me in place. Which means Sebastian Ward just made his last mistake. Outside the elevator I heard voices. Security. Sebastian's raised complaints. The override key scraping in the lock. Louis stood, straightening his cuffs with unhurried precision. When those doors open, you stand behind me. You don't speak. You don't look at him. Understood. I nodded, unable to form words. The elevator gave a mechanical shudder, and the doors began to part. The doors stopped. They'd opened barely an inch, just enough to let in a sliver of fluorescent hallway light, and the muffled sound of Sebastian's voice arguing with security, before they ground to a halt with a metallic shriek. Louis's hand was still on the panel, his tattooed fingers pressing something I couldn't see. What are you? I started, but then I heard it. The scrape of metal on metal. Different from the override key. Sharper. More deliberate. Sebastian had found the service access. No. The word tore from my throat. No, he can't. He doesn't have clearance for. He has money, Louis said flatly. Money buys clearance. The elevator lurched, tilting slightly as something impacted from above. Sebastian had accessed the roof hatch. I could hear him now, his breathing harsh and ragged, the sound of his hands scrabbling against metal. He was coming in. He was going to drop down through the ceiling and there would be nowhere to run, no escape, just this metal box in his hands, and my vision whited out. The walls dissolved. I was back in our apartment, backed into the corner of the bedroom, Sebastian blocking the only door. His face twisted with that expression that meant he was past listening, past reason. I could smell the whiskey on his breath, feel the carpet burns on my knees where he'd. Anna. The voice cut through the memory, but I couldn't respond, couldn't move. My chest had locked up completely, my lungs refusing to expand. The edges of my vision sparkled with black stars. Anna, look at me. I couldn't. I was drowning in air that wouldn't come. in panic that had finally broken through whatever dam had been holding it back for 8 months. My fingers clawed at my throat, trying to open an airway that had collapsed under the weight of 3 years of terror. Then Louis moved. He didn't grab me, didn't shake me. He simply positioned himself between me and the ceiling hatch, his broad shoulders blocking my view of where Sebastian was trying to break through. One hand braced against the elevator wall beside my head, caging me in, while the other caught my wrist, not restraining but redirecting my hand from my throat to his chest. "Breathe with me." His voice had lost its cold edge, becoming something low and commanding. "In through your nose. Feel my chest rise." I couldn't focus on his words, but my body responded to the solid warmth under my palm, to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Up down, slow and controlled while chaos raged above us. "He's not getting in here," Louis said, and there was something in his tone that cut through the panic fog. Not reassurance but certainty. "Do you understand me? He can tear that hatch apart and it won't matter. He doesn't touch you." Above us, metal groaned. Sebastian's voice filtered through, breathless and frantic. Anna, I swear to God, if you think this thug can protect you, I will burn his entire operation to the ground. I have connections. I have." Louis didn't even glance up. His eyes stayed locked on mine, winter steel boring into me with an intensity that was its own kind of cage. "Count with me. 5 things you can see." "I can't." "5 things. Now. Your tie." The words came out broken. The panel. Your hand. The buttons. I struggled, my vision still swimming. "For things you can hear." Sebastian was still shouting, but Louis's voice wrapped around me like a weighted blanket, something solid to hold onto in the chaos. "Your voice." His voice. The elevator. I stopped listening. Footsteps. Heavy ones. Louis smiled, cold and sharp. "Very good. Those would be my men." The sounds from above changed abruptly. Sebastian's tirade cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a scuffle, a grunt of pain, and then silence. 3 things you can feel," Louis continued, as if a man hadn't just been violently subdued 6 feet above our heads. My palm was still pressed against his chest. I could feel his heartbeat, steady and unhurried despite everything. "Your heartbeat. The wall behind me. Your hand on my wrist. Good girl." The words shouldn't have steadied me, but they did. "Now breathe." I did. One shaking breath, then another. The elevator had stopped shaking. Above us, there were no more sounds of struggle. Just the low murmur of voices I didn't recognize, professional and efficient. Louis finally looked up, toward the hatch, and I saw satisfaction flicker across his face. When his gaze returned to me, that dark possessiveness had solidified into something unbreakable. "I told you," he said softly. "He doesn't touch you. Not now. Not ever again." My breathing had steadied, but my mind was catching up now, processing what had just happened with a clarity that made my stomach turn. Louis's men had subdued Sebastian. Not security. Not the police. His men. And they'd done it with the kind of efficiency that spoke of practice, of this being routine. I pulled my hand back from Louis's chest, suddenly too aware of how close he still stood, how his body still caged me against the wall. He let me retreat, but only barely, his expression unreadable as he watched me connect the dots he'd laid out. The Gallagher justice. The words tasted like ash. "That's what they call it, isn't it? When someone crosses you and they just disappear." "They don't disappear," Louis corrected, adjusting his cufflinks with maddening calm. "They're found. Eventually. In pieces or in prison, depending on my mood and their offense." The casual way he said it made it worse somehow. He wasn't bragging or threatening. He was simply stating facts, the way someone might describe their morning routine. I'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. Whispered in the back rooms of restaurants, muttered by cops who looked the other way, printed in newspaper articles that asked questions no one would answer. Louis Gallagher controlled everything north of the river. The docks, the construction contracts, the city council votes. He owned judges and terrified prosecutors. 3 years ago, a rival gang leader had tried to move into his territory. They found him chained in a shipping container at the port, alive but altered. A warning carved into his chest. This is mercy. The message had been received. No one challenged Lewis Gallagher anymore. And I had just become his newest acquisition. What happens now? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. You said I'm under your protection. What does that actually mean? Lewis tilted his head, studying me with that predatory patience. It means Sebastian Ward no longer exists as a threat. It means you'll have security, a safe place to live, freedom to work without looking over your shoulder. In exchange for what? In exchange, he said slowly, each word deliberate, for your presence, your loyalty, your cooperation. The way he paused before that last word sent ice through my veins. I won't be your prisoner. No, Lewis agreed. You'll be my guest. An honored one. Free to move within certain boundaries, free to refuse certain requests. His eyes darkened, but not free to leave. There it was. The cage door closed, gilded and comfortable, but a cage nonetheless. I'd spent 3 years as Sebastian's possession, 2 years before that trying to be the perfect wife, and 8 months running. And now I was trading one form of captivity for another. Why? The question burst out of me, raw and desperate. Why do you even care? You don't know me. I'm nobody. I'm just. You're not nobody. Lewis's hand rose, and I flinched before I could stop myself. He paused, something flickering across his face too quick to name, then continued the movement slowly, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear with unexpected gentleness. You stood up to me when you were terrified. You understood the game and played it well. And someone marked you, Anna. Someone broke something beautiful and thought they could walk away from it. His thumb traced my jaw again, finding that scar with unerring accuracy. I don't forgive that. I won't forget it. And I don't share. The possessiveness in his voice was absolute, terrifying in its sincerity. This wasn't protection. This was ownership. A different kind than Sebastian's. More sophisticated, more seductive, infinitely more dangerous, because part of me wanted to lean into it, wanted to believe that this cage might be safer than the world outside. I jumped from one prison into another. I whispered. Lewis's smile was sharp and knowing. Perhaps. But in my prison, Anna, no one touches what's mine. Not without losing their hands. He stepped back, finally giving me space to breathe. The choice is yours. Walk out of this elevator alone and hope Sebastian doesn't find you again. Or walk out under my protection and accept what that means. Above us, I heard footsteps retreating. Sebastian being carried away. His fate already sealed whether I agreed or not. Lewis extended his hand, palm up. An offering. A trap. Salvation and damnation wrapped in tattooed skin and cold certainty. Choose, he said. I stared at his outstretched hand like it was a loaded gun. My fingers twitched at my sides, caught between self-preservation and the exhausted realization that I had nowhere left to run. Sebastian would find me again. He always did. And next time, there might not be an elevator to dive into, no cold-eyed savior to press the lock button. What exactly are the terms? My voice came out steadier than I felt. You said you were a personal florist and a protected guest. Define those. Lewis's expression shifted, approval flickering in those winter eyes. He lowered his hand but didn't look offended by my hesitation. If anything, he seemed pleased I was negotiating. Smart. Let's be explicit then, since ambiguity only leads to disappointment. He pressed a button and the elevator hummed to life, beginning its ascent. Sebastian Ward will be dealt with permanently. I won't bore you with the details, but he won't be filing missing person reports or restraining orders. He won't be showing up at your door. He'll simply cease to be a problem. The casual way he discussed ending a human life should have horrified me more than it did. Instead, I felt a sick curl of relief. In exchange, Lewis continued, you'll live on my estate. Private quarters, your own space, but within the property boundaries. You'll maintain the floral arrangements for my home, my clubs, my business venues. You're talented, I've seen your work. I have use for that talent. So I'd be an employee. You'd be under my protection, he corrected. The floral work is a courtesy, a way for you to maintain purpose and independence. But make no mistake, Anna, you won't be clocking in and out. You'll be part of my household. That means my security, my people, my world. The elevator passed the 3rd floor. 4th. I was running out of time to decide. And the protected guest part? I asked, though I already knew the answer would be the most complicated piece. Louis stepped closer, not touching but close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. It means you'll attend certain events with me. Dinners, galas, meetings where having a beautiful woman at my side serves a purpose. It means you'll be seen as mine, which will deter anyone from thinking they can touch you. And it means, he paused, his gaze intensifying, that I will require your presence when I want it. For conversation. For company. For whatever I decide I need from you. Sex. I forced the word out bluntly. If you're willing. His hand rose to cup my face, thumb brushing my bottom lip. I don't take unwilling women to my bed, Anna. But I also don't pretend I brought you into my world out of pure altruism. You're beautiful. You're damaged in ways that call to something dark in me. And yes, eventually I will want all of you. The honesty was brutal and somehow more terrifying than lies would have been. At least with Sebastian, I'd convinced myself it was love twisted into obsession. Louis offered no such illusion. This was possession, pure and calculated. How long? I whispered. How long would this arrangement last? Until I release you. Or until you convince me you're ready to stand on your own. His thumb traced my scar again, that gesture that was becoming familiar, claiming, but I should warn you, I don't let go of things easily, and I've already decided you're worth keeping. The elevator chimed. 10th floor. The doors would open soon onto whatever waited on the other side. Sebastian's fate. My new life. The point of no return. If I say no? I had to ask even though I already knew. Louis's smile was almost gentle. Then I'll have my men escort you safely to your apartment. Give you a week's head start before Sebastian's friends start asking questions about where he went. You'll be on your own again, Anna. Free and terrified and alone. He made freedom sound like a death sentence. And maybe for someone like me it was. I looked at his hand still extended between us. At the tattoos that marked him as dangerous. At the cold certainty in his eyes. He promised he'd keep every word of this devil's bargain. Then I placed my palm in his. I accept your terms. Louis's fingers closed around mine, warm and unbreakable. Then welcome to the Gallagher household, Anna. You're mine now. The elevator chimed its arrival, and the doors slid open to reveal chaos barely contained. Sebastian stood in the center of the hallway, disheveled and wild-eyed. His designer suit torn at the shoulder where someone had clearly grabbed him. 2 Sovereign Club security guards flanked him, looking uncomfortable and out of their depth. Behind them, the club's general manager hovered, phone pressed to his ear, face pale with the kind of panic that came from having a situation spiral far beyond standard protocol. But it was the other men that made my breath catch. 4 of them lined the walls like sentries, perfectly still in dark suits that did nothing to hide the violence coiled in their frames. They weren't security guards. They were predators in tailored clothing, and they all had their eyes locked on Sebastian with the patient focus of wolves waiting for permission to feed. Louis stepped out of the elevator first, still holding my hand, pulling me with him into the scene. His posture was relaxed, almost bored, but I felt the shift in the room the moment he appeared. The security guard straightened. The manager's phone call died mid-sentence. Even Sebastian faltered, his righteous fury cracking as he registered who he was facing. Mr. Gallagher, the manager stammered, nearly dropping his phone. I apologize for the disturbance. We were just attempting to. Louis raised his free hand slightly, and the man's words died in his throat. The gesture was minimal but absolute. You were attempting to do your job. I appreciate that. However, the situation is resolved. Resolved. Sebastian's voice cracked with disbelief and rage. This bastard kidnapped my wife. He trapped her in that elevator and… Ex-wife, Louis corrected, his tone almost conversational. And I believe you'll find that Miss Payne entered the elevator of her own volition, while fleeing from you. Sebastian's face flushed dark red. She's confused. She's been unstable since the divorce. I was just trying to talk to her to help her, and she ran like a woman terrified for her life? Louis's voice remained pleasant, but something in it made Sebastian's words dry up. Interesting characterization. Tell me, Councilman Ward, does the phrase glass coffee table mean anything to you? The color drained from Sebastian's face. Behind him, one of Louis's men shifted slightly, a predatory ripple of movement. I don't know what she told you, but… She told me everything. Louis pulled me forward slightly, positioning me at his side. His arm moved around my waist, a gesture of possession so clear it might as well have been a brand. And I've decided to take a personal interest in her well-being. I'm sure you understand. Sebastian looked between us, and I watched the calculation happen in real time behind his eyes. He was measuring the threat, weighing his political connections against Louis Gallagher's reputation, trying to find an angle that would let him walk away with his pride intact. He found none. This isn't over, Sebastian said, but the threat rang hollow even as he spoke. I have friends. I have influence. You can't just… I can. Louis's voice dropped to something cold and final. And I have. Your influence extends to city council meetings and country club memberships. Mine extends to every dark corner of this city where real power lives. So let me be very clear, Sebastian. He said the name like a curse. If you come near Anna again, if you call her, if you think about her, they won't find enough of you to bury. One of Louis's men, the largest one with scars across his knuckles, smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. Sebastian's bravado crumbled. I watched it happen, watched the man who'd terrorized me for 3 years reduced to a pale, trembling thing under the weight of Louis's regard. He took a step back, then another, his eyes darting to the security guards who were suddenly very interested in the floor. Good, Louis said softly. Now leave. My men will escort you to your vehicle. And Sebastian? Consider this your only warning. Next time there won't be a conversation. The 4 men in dark suits moved as one, surrounding Sebastian with the casual efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times. He didn't resist. He didn't even protest. He just let himself be shepherded toward the stairwell, his shoulders hunched, his face twisted with impotent rage and fear. I stood frozen, watching the man who'd haunted my nightmares for 8 months being removed like trash, like something insignificant and disposable. Louis's arm tightened around my waist. Breathe, Anna. I did, and tasted freedom for the first time in years. It tasted like smoke and cedar and something dark I couldn't name. It tasted like Louis Gallagher, and I couldn't tell if that should terrify me or thrill me. Perhaps it was both. The stairwell door closed behind Sebastian and Louis's men with a soft click that sounded remarkably like a coffin lid. The silence that followed was thick and expectant. The security guards exchanged glances, clearly desperate to be anywhere else. The manager cleared his throat nervously. Mr. Gallagher, if there's anything we can do to… Send my regards to the owner, Louis said without looking at him. And have someone clean up Miss Payne's flower arrangement in the lobby. I'll have a replacement delivered tomorrow. It was a dismissal as clear as a slammed door. The manager nodded rapidly and retreated, the security guards following like ducklings, all of them grateful to escape whatever dark current ran between Louis and me. Then we were alone in the hallway, and the reality of what I'd agreed to began settling over me like a shroud. My van, I said, grasping for something practical, something normal. I need to get my equipment. I have flowers in the back that need refrigeration and… already handled. Louis guided me toward the elevators, his hand firm on the small of my back. My people have been securing your assets since the moment you took my hand. The words penetrated slowly. Securing my assets. What does that mean? It means your van is being driven to my estate as we speak. Your equipment, your inventory, everything inside. All of it is being transferred to the greenhouse I'm having prepared for you. We stepped into a different elevator. This one marble and mirror where the other had been brass and shadow. Louis pressed the button for the parking garage, and I watched our reflection multiply into infinity. 100 Annas standing beside 100 Louis Gallaghers, each one looking more trapped than the last. I didn't agree to leave tonight, I said, hearing the edge of panic creeping into my voice. I have things at my apartment. My clothes, a mattress on the floor. 3 changes of clothes. A kitchen knife under your pillow. Louis's eyes met mine in the mirror. I told you, Anna. I know everything. And none of it is worth going back for. The elevator descended, and with each floor my old life felt further away. I need to pack. I need to. You need to understand that the moment Sebastian saw you with me, your apartment became a target. Louis turned to face me fully, his expression serious. He'll send people there. Friends, private investigators, anyone desperate or stupid enough to take his money. Your landlord will get a visit. Your neighbors will be questioned. That place stopped being safe the second you stepped into my world. So I just leave? Abandon everything. You left it the moment you ran from him. His hand cupped my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. You've been living like a ghost, Anna. Sleeping on a mattress you bought used because you were afraid of leaving a paper trail. Paying rent in cash. Using a fake name on your bank account. That's not a life. That's just surviving. The elevator chimed. Parking level. The doors opened onto concrete and shadows, the smell of exhaust and expensive cars. My van sat near the elevator bank, engine idling. A man I didn't recognize sat in the driver's seat, looking straight ahead with professional disinterest. In the space where my van should have been empty, I could see the shapes of my flower boxes through the windows, already packed and secured. Louis led me past it toward a black SUV with tinted windows. Another of his men held the rear door open, his face impassive. Wait. I stopped walking, planting my feet even though Louis's hand remained on my back. I need to go home. Even if it's just to say goodbye to it. I need. No. The word was soft but immovable. You don't go back to cages once you've left them, Anna. Not even to retrieve the chains. That's not your decision to make. Louis's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Yes, he said quietly, it is. You gave me that right when you accepted my terms. Your safety is my responsibility now, which means I decide what risks you take. And going back to that apartment is a risk I won't allow. The SUV waited like a black mouth ready to swallow me whole. Inside would be leather seats and climate control, and the beginning of whatever my life as Louis Gallagher's protected guest entailed. Behind me was the parking garage exit, the city lights beyond, the illusion of freedom that had kept me running for 8 months. But Louis was right. I'd stopped living the day I'd married Sebastian. Everything since had just been different flavors of survival. Get in the car, Anna. Louis's voice was gentle, inexorable. Let me give you something better than what you're leaving behind. I looked at him, at this beautiful, dangerous man who decided I was worth keeping, and took the last step away from the woman I'd been. I got in the car. The Gallagher estate materialized out of the darkness like something from a Gothic novel. All stone and iron and sprawling grounds that seemed to stretch into infinity. Security gates opened silently as we approached, closing behind us with a finality that made my chest tighten. The driveway curved through manicured lawns and ancient trees, their branches creating shadows that moved like living things in the headlights. Then I saw the flowers. They lined the circular drive in a riot of color that should have been impossible at this time of year. Roses and peonies and something that might have been orchids, all perfectly arranged, all blooming despite the late autumn chill. Topiaries shaped like creatures I couldn't name flanked the main entrance. And through the massive windows of what had to be a conservatory, I could see a jungle of green and bright petals glowing under artificial sunlight. You said you'd have a greenhouse prepared, I whispered. staring at the glass structure that took up nearly a quarter of the visible estate. That's not a greenhouse. That's a cathedral. You'll need space to work. Lewis's voice came from beside me, casual, as if he hadn't just shown me a floral facility that would cost more than I'd earn in 10 lifetimes. I have 7 properties that require weekly arrangements. 12 if you count the businesses. You'll have 3 assistants to start, more if you need them. The SUV stopped at the main entrance where a woman in her 50s waited, impeccably dressed, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She opened my door before Lewis's man could reach it, offering a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Miss Payne, welcome. I'm Mrs. Chun, the house manager. I'll show you to your quarters." I followed her into a foyer that made the Sovereign Club look modest. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto marble floors veined with gold. A staircase curved upward like a ribbon, leading to floors I couldn't count. Oil paintings lined the walls, not reproductions but originals, the kind you saw in museums behind velvet ropes. And everywhere flowers. In vases taller than I was, in arrangements spilling from alcoves, climbing up trellises that somehow existed indoors. The scent was overwhelming, intoxicating. A perfume that whispered of money and obsession. Mrs. Chun led me through hallways that seemed to multiply, each one more opulent than the last, until she stopped at a set of double doors carved with roses so detailed I could see the thorns. "You're sweet," she said, opening the doors. I stepped inside and my breath caught. It wasn't a room. It was an apartment. Bedroom with a bed large enough to sleep 4. Dressed in silk the color of cream. A sitting area with furniture that looked hand-carved. A bathroom visible through another doorway, all white marble and gold fixtures. And along every surface, in every corner, arrangements of white lilies identical to the one I'd been working on when Sebastian had walked into the Sovereign Club. "Mr. Gallagher had them placed this afternoon," Mrs. Chun said. "He said you had unfinished business with that particular design. This afternoon. Hours before I'd even agreed to come here. He'd known. Lewis had known I would say yes, had prepared this beautiful cage before I'd ever stepped into his elevator. Your belongings from the van are being unpacked in the greenhouse," Mrs. Chun continued. "Fresh clothes have been provided in the closet. Mr. Gallagher requests your presence for dinner at 8. That gives you 2 hours to rest and refresh yourself." Requests. As if I had a choice. "And if I don't want to have dinner?" I asked, testing the boundaries of my new prison. Mrs. Chen's smile remained fixed. "Then Mr. Gallagher will eat alone, and you'll have missed an excellent meal. He doesn't force his guests to do anything, Miss Payne. But he does appreciate cooperation." She left, the doors closing with a soft click that might have been a lock or might have been my imagination. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by white lilies and luxury, and turned slowly to take it all in. Through the windows I could see the greenhouse glowing in the darkness, my equipment already inside, my future already mapped out in soil and stems and petals. I'd escaped Sebastian's fists only to fall into Lewis's velvet grasp. I was safe, protected, given a purpose and space to thrive, and completely, utterly owned. I walked to the window and pressed my palm against the glass, looking out at the sprawling grounds that were now my entire world. Somewhere beyond those gates was the city I'd spent 8 months hiding in. The life I'd tried to build from scraps and fear. Behind me was a bed I hadn't chosen, in a room I hadn't asked for, in a house that belonged to a man whose reputation was built on violence and control. I'd traded one monster for another. But this monster had given me flowers instead of bruises, space instead of corners to hide in, purpose instead of terror. The question that would haunt me wasn't whether I'd made the right choice. It was whether I'd eventually stop seeing the bars of this beautiful cage and mistake captivity for love. In the reflection of the window I saw myself, still wearing my work clothes, still carrying the ghost of Sebastian's fear. Standing in a room filled with flowers that represented everything I'd ever wanted and everything I should have run from. Lewis Gallagher had saved me. And that, I realized with a chill that settled deep in my bones, might be the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to me.